Hello friends, and welcome to the continuation of this calm reading of What Katy Did. If you want to listen to the story from the start, all previous chapters are available on this channel as well. It is time to unwind. Find a place where you can relax. Once you have settled in, take a deep breath. Your day has come to an end. All that is left for you to do now is to listen to the story and fall asleep. And so, let us begin. Chapter 7. Cousin Helen's Visit. A little knot of the schoolgirls were walking home together one afternoon in July. As they neared Dr. Carr's gate, Maria Fisk exclaimed at the sight of a pretty bunch of flowers lying in the middle of the sidewalk. "Oh my," she cried, "see what somebody's dropped. I'm going to have it." She stooped to pick it up, but just as her fingers touched the stems, the nosegay, as if bewitched, began to move. Maria made a bewildering clutch. The nosegay moved faster, and at last vanished under the gate. While a giggling sounded from the other side of the hedge. "Did you see that?" shrieked Maria. "Those flowers ran away of themselves." "Nonsense," said Katy. "It's those absurd children." Then, opening the gate, she called, "John, Dory, come out and show yourselves." But nobody replied, and no one could be seen. The nosegay lay on the path, however, and picking it up, Katy exhibited to the girls a long end of black thread tied to the stems. "That's a very favorite trick of Johnny's," she said. "She and Dory are always tying up flowers and putting them out on the walk to please people. Here, Maria, take 'em if you like, though I don't think John's taste in bouquets is very good." "Isn't it splendid to have vacation come?" said one of the bigger girls. "What are you all going to do?" "We are going to the seaside. Pa says he'll take Susie and me to Niagara," said Maria. "I'm going to make my aunt a visit," said Alice Blair. "She lives in a real lovely place in the country, and there's a pond there. And Tom, that's my cousin, says he'll teach me to row." "What are you going to do, Katy?" "Oh, I don't know. Play around and have splendid times," replied Katy, throwing her bag of books into the air and catching it again. But the other girls looked as if they didn't think this good fun at all, and as if they were sorry for her. And Katy felt suddenly that her vacation wasn't going to be so pleasant as that of the rest. "I wish Papa would take us somewhere," she said to Clover, as they walked up the gravel path. "All the other girls' papas do." "He's too busy," replied Clover. "Besides, I don't think any of the rest of the girls have half such good times as we. Ellen Robbins says she'd give $1 million for such nice brothers and sisters as ours to play with. And, you know, Maria and Susie have awful times at home, though they do go to places. Mrs. Fisk is so particular. She always says don't. And they haven't got any yard to the house, or anything. I wouldn't change." "Nor I," said Katy, cheering up at these words of wisdom. "Oh, isn't it lovely to think there won't be any school tomorrow? Vacations are just splendid." And she gave her bag another toss. It fell to the ground with a crash. "There, you've cracked your slate," said Clover. "No matter. I shan't want it again for 8 weeks," replied Katy, comfortably as they ran up the steps. They burst open the front door and raced upstairs, crying, "Hurrah! Hurrah! Vacation's begun! Aunt Izzy, vacation's begun!" Then they stopped short, for lo! The upper hall was all in confusion. Sounds of beating and dusting came from the spare room. Tables and chairs were standing about, and a cot bed, which seemed to be taking a walk all by itself, had stopped short at the head of the stairs and barred the way. "Why, how queer!" said Katy, trying to get by. "What can be going to happen? Oh, there's Aunt Izzy. Aunt Izzy, who's coming?" "What are you moving the things out of the blue room for?" "Oh, gracious, is that you?" replied Aunt Izzy, who looked very hot and flurried. "Now, children, it's no use for you to stand there asking questions. I haven't got time to answer them. Let the bedstead alone, Katy. You'll push it into the wall. There, I told you so." As Katy gave an impatient shove. "You've made a bad mark on the paper. What a troublesome child you are. Go right downstairs, both of you, and don't come up this way again till after tea. I've just as much as I can possibly attend to till then." "Just tell us what's going to happen, and we will," cried the children. "Your cousin Helen is coming to visit us," said Miss Izzy curtly, and disappeared into the blue room. This was news indeed. Katy and Clover ran downstairs in great excitement, and after consulting a little, retired to the loft to talk it over in peace and quiet. Cousin Helen coming. It seemed as strange as if Queen Victoria, gold crown and all, had invited herself to tea, or as if some character out of a book, Robinson Crusoe, say, or Amy Herbert, had driven up with a trunk and announced the intention of spending a week. For, to the imaginations of the children, Cousin Helen was as interesting and unreal as anybody in the fairy tales. Cinderella, or Bluebeard, or dear Red Riding Hood herself. Only there was a sort of mixture of Sunday school book in the idea of her. For Cousin Helen was very, very good. None of them had ever seen her. Philly said he was sure she hadn't any legs, because she never went away from home, and lay on a sofa all the time. But the rest knew that this was because Cousin Helen was ill. Papa always went to visit her twice a year, and he liked to talk to the children about her, and tell how sweet and patient she was, and what a pretty room she lived in. Katy and Clover had played Cousin Helen so long that now they were frightened as well as glad at the idea of seeing their real one. "Do you suppose she will want us to say hymns to her all the time?" asked Clover. "Not all the time," replied Katy, "because you know she'll get tired, and have to take naps in the afternoon, and then, of course, she reads the Bible a great deal. Oh dear, how quiet we shall have to be! I wonder how long she's going to stay." "What do you suppose she looks like?" went on Clover. "Something like Lucy in Mrs. Sherwood, I guess, with blue eyes and curls, and a long straight nose. And she'll keep her hands clasped so all the time, and wear frilled wrappers, and lie on the sofa perfectly still, and never smile, but just look patient. We'll have to take off our boots in the hall, Clover, and go upstairs in stocking feet, so as not to make a noise all the time she stays." "Won't it be funny?" giggled Clover, her sober little face growing bright at the idea of this variation on the hymns. The time seemed very long till the next afternoon, when Cousin Helen was expected. Aunt Izzy, who was in a great excitement, gave the children many orders about their behavior. They were to do this and that, and not to do the other. Dorry at last announced that he wished Cousin Helen would just stay at home. Clover and Elsie, who had been thinking pretty much the same thing in private, were glad to hear that she was on her way to a water cure and would stay only 4 days. 5 o'clock came. They all sat on the steps waiting for the carriage. At last it drove up. Papa was on the box. He motioned the children to stand back. Then he helped out a nice-looking young woman, who, Aunt Izzy told them, was Cousin Helen's nurse, and then, very carefully, lifted Cousin Helen in his arms and brought her in. "Oh, there are the chicks," were the first words the children heard, in such a gay, pleasant voice. "Do set me down somewhere, Uncle. I want to see them so much." So Papa put Cousin Helen on the hall sofa. The nurse fetched a pillow, and when she was made comfortable, Dr. Carr called to the little ones. "Cousin Helen wants to see you," he said. "Indeed I do," said the bright voice. "So this is Katy. Why, what a splendid tall Katy it is. And this is Clover," kissing her. "And this, dear little Elsie. You all look as natural as possible, just as if I had seen you before." And she hugged them all around. Not as if it was polite to like them because they were relations, but as if she had loved them and wanted them all her life. There was something in Cousin Helen's face and manner which made the children at home with her at once. Even Philly, who had backed away with his hands behind him, after staring hard for a minute or two, came up with a sort of rush to get his share of kissing. Still, Katy's first feeling was one of disappointment. Cousin Helen was not at all like Lucy in Mrs. Sherwood's story. Her nose turned up the least bit in the world. She had brown hair, which didn't curl, brown skin, and bright eyes, which danced when she laughed or spoke. Her face was thin, but except for that, you wouldn't have guessed that she was sick. She didn't fold her hands, and she didn't look patient, but absolutely glad and merry. Her dress wasn't a frill wrapper, but a sort of loose traveling thing of pretty gray stuff, with a rose-colored bow and bracelets, and a round hat trimmed with a gray feather. All Katy's dreams about the saintly invalid seemed to take wings and fly away. But the more she watched Cousin Helen, the more she seemed to like her, and to feel as if she were nicer than the imaginary person which she and Clover had invented. "She looks just like other people, don't she?" whispered Cece, who had come over to have a peep at the new arrival. "Yes," replied Katy, doubtfully, "only a great, great deal prettier." By and by, Papa carried Cousin Helen upstairs. All the children wanted to go too, but he told them she was tired and must rest. So they went outdoors to play till tea-time. "Oh, do let me take up the tray," cried Katy at the tea-table, as she watched Aunt Izzy getting ready Cousin Helen's supper. Such a nice supper. Cold chicken and raspberries and cream, and tea in a pretty pink and white china cup, and such a snow-white napkin as Aunt Izzy spread over the tray. "No, indeed," said Aunt Izzy. "You'll drop it the first thing." But Katy's eyes begged so hard that Dr. Carr said, "Yes, let her, Izzy. I like to see the girls useful." So Katy, proud of the commission, took the tray and carried it carefully across the hall. There was a bowl of flowers on the table. As she passed, she was struck with a bright idea. She set down the tray and picked out a rose, laid it on a napkin besides the saucer of crimson raspberries. It looked very pretty, and Katy smiled to herself with pleasure. "What are you stopping for?" called Aunt Izzy from the dining room. "Do be careful, Katy. I really think Bridget had better take it." "Oh, no, no," protested Katy. "I'm most up already." And she sped up the stairs as fast as she could. Luckless speed. She had just reached the door of the blue room when she tripped upon a bootlace, which, as usual, was dangling, made a misstep, and stumbled. She caught at the door to save herself. The door flew open, and Katy, with the tray, cream, raspberries, rose and all, descended in a confused heap upon the carpet. "I told you so!" exclaimed Aunt Izzy from the bottom of the stairs. Katy never forgot how kind Cousin Helen was on this occasion. She was in bed, and was of course a good deal startled at the sudden crash and tumble on her floor. But after one little jump, nothing could have been sweeter than the way in which she comforted poor crestfallen Katy, and made so merry over the accident that even Aunt Izzy almost forgot to scold. The broken dishes were piled up and the carpet made clean again, while Aunt Izzy prepared another tray just as nice as the first. "Please let Katy bring it," pleaded Cousin Helen in her pleasant voice. "I am sure she will be careful this time. And Katy, I want just such another rose on the napkin. I guess that was your doing, wasn't it?" Katy was careful. This time all went well. The tray was placed safely on a little table beside the bed, and Katy sat watching Cousin Helen eat her supper with a warm, loving feeling at her heart. I think we are scarcely ever so grateful to people as when they help us get back our self-esteem. Cousin Helen hadn't much appetite, though she declared everything was delicious. Katy could see that she was very tired. "Now," she said, when she had finished, "if you'll shake up this pillow, so, and move this other pillow a little, I think I will settle myself to sleep. Thanks, that's just right. Why, Katy dear, you are a born nurse. Now kiss me. Good night. Tomorrow we will have a nice talk." Katy went downstairs, very happy. "Cousin Helen's perfectly lovely," she told Clover, "and she got on the most beautiful nightgown, all lace and ruffles. It's just like a nightgown in a book." "Isn't it wicked to care about clothes when you're sick?" questioned Cece. "I don't believe Cousin Helen could do anything wicked," said Katy. "I told Ma that she had on bracelets, and Ma said she feared your cousin was a worldly person," retorted Cece, priming up her lips. Katy and Clover were quite distressed at this opinion. They talked about it while they were undressing. "I mean to ask Cousin Helen tomorrow," said Katy. Next morning the children got up very early. They were so glad that it was vacation. If it hadn't been, they would have been forced to go to school without seeing Cousin Helen, for she didn't wake up till late. They grew so impatient of the delay, and went upstairs so often to listen at the door and see if she were moving, that Aunt Izzy finally had to order them off. Katy rebelled against this order a good deal, but she consoled herself by going into the garden and picking the prettiest flowers she could find to give to Cousin Helen the moment she could see her. When Aunt Izzy let her go up, Cousin Helen was lying on the sofa, all dressed for the day in a fresh blue muslin, with blue ribbons and cunning bronze slippers with rosettes on the toes. The sofa had been wheeled round with its back to the light. There was a cushion with a pretty fluted cover that Katy had never seen before, and several other things were scattered about, which gave the room quite a different air. All the house was neat, but somehow Aunt Izzie's rooms never were pretty. Children's eyes are quick to perceive such things, and Katy saw at once that the blue room had never looked like this. Cousin Helen was white and tired, but her eyes and smile were as bright as ever. She was delighted with the flowers, which Katy presented rather shyly. "Oh, how lovely!" she said. "I must put them in water right away. Katy, dear, don't you want to bring that little vase on the bureau and set it on this chair beside me? And please pour a little water into it first." "What a beauty!" cried Katy, as she lifted the graceful white cup swung on a gilt stand. "Is it yours, Cousin Helen?" "Yes, it is my pet vase. It stands on a little table beside me at home, and I fancied that the water cure would seem more homelike if I had it with me there, so I brought it along. But why do you look so puzzled, Katy? Does it seem queer that a vase should travel about in a trunk?" "No," said Katy slowly. "I was only thinking, Cousin Helen, is it worldly to have pretty things when you're sick?" Cousin Helen laughed heartily. "What put that idea into your head?" she asked. "Cece said so when I told her about your beautiful nightgown." Cousin Helen laughed again. "Well," she said, "I'll tell you what I think, Katy. Pretty things are no more worldly than ugly ones, except when they spoil us by making us vain, or careless of the comfort of other people. And sickness is such a disagreeable thing in itself, that unless sick people take great pains, they soon grow to be eyesores to themselves and everybody about them. I don't think it is possible for an invalid to be too particular, and when one has the backache and the headache and the all-over ache," she added, smiling, "there isn't much danger of growing vain because of a ruffle more or less on one's nightgown, or a bit of bright ribbon." Then she began to arrange the flowers, touching each separate one gently, and as if she loved it. "What a queer noise!" she exclaimed suddenly, stopping. It was queer, a sort of snuffing and snorting sound, as if a walrus or a seahorse were promenading up and down in the hall. Katy opened the door. Behold, there were Johnny and Dorry, very red in the face from flattening their noses against the keyhole, in a vain attempt to see if Cousin Helen were up and ready to receive company. "Oh, let them come in," cried Cousin Helen from her sofa. So they came in, followed before long by Clover and Elsie. Such a merry morning as they had! Cousin Helen proved to possess a perfect genius for storytelling, and for suggesting games which could be played about her sofa, and did not make more noise than she could bear. Aunt Izzie, dropping in about 11 o'clock, found them having such a good time that almost before she knew it, she was drawn into the game too. Nobody had ever heard of such a thing before. There sat Aunt Izzie on the floor, with 3 long lamplighters stuck in her hair, playing "I'm a genteel lady, always genteel," in the jolliest manner possible. The children were so enchanted at the spectacle that they could hardly attend to the game, and were always forgetting how many horns they had. Clover privately thought that Cousin Helen must be a witch, and Papa, when he came home at noon, said almost the same thing. "What have you been doing to them, Helen?" he inquired, as he opened the door. and saw the merry circle on the carpet. Aunt Izzie's hair was half pulled down, and Philly was rolling over and over in convulsions of laughter. But Cousin Helen said she hadn't done anything, and pretty soon Papa was on the floor too, playing away as fast as the rest. "I must put a stop to this," he cried, when everybody was tired of laughing, and everybody's head was stuck as full of paper quills as a porcupine's back. "Cousin Helen will be worn out. Run away, all of you, and don't come near this door again till the clock strikes 4. Do you hear, chicks? Run, run, shoo, shoo." The children scuttled away like a brood of fowls, all but Katy. "Oh, Papa, I'll be so quiet," she pleaded. "Mightn't I stay just till the dinner bell rings?" "Do let her," said Cousin Helen. So Papa said yes. Katy sat on the floor, holding Cousin Helen's hand, and listening to her talk with Papa. It interested her, though it was about things and people she did not know. "How is Alex?" asked Dr. Carr at length. "Quite well now," replied Cousin Helen, with one of her brightest looks. "He was run down and tired in the spring, and we were a little anxious about him, but Emma persuaded him to take a fortnight's vacation, and he came back all right." "Do you see them often?" "Almost every day, and little Helen comes every day, you know, for her lessons." "Is she as pretty as she used to be?" "Oh, yes, prettier, I think. She is a lovely little creature. Having her so much with me is one of my greatest treats. Alex tries to think that she looks a little as I used to, but that is a compliment so great that I dare not appropriate it." Dr. Carr stooped and kissed Cousin Helen as if he could not help it. "My dear child," he said. That was all. But something in the tone made Katy curious. "Papa," she said after dinner, "who is Alex that you and Cousin Helen were talking about?" "Why, Katy, what makes you want to know?" "I can't exactly tell. Only Cousin Helen looked so, and you kissed her, and I thought perhaps it was something interesting." "So it is," said Dr. Carr, drawing her onto his knee. "I've a mind to tell you about it, Katy, because you're old enough to see how beautiful it is, and wise enough, I hope, not to chatter or ask questions. Alex is the name of somebody who, long ago, when Cousin Helen was well and strong, she loved and expected to marry." "Oh, why didn't she?" cried Katy. "She met with a dreadful accident," continued Dr. Carr. "For a long time they thought she would die. Then she grew slowly better, and the doctors told her that she might live a good many years, but that she would have to lie on her sofa always and be helpless and a cripple." Alex felt dreadfully when he heard this. He wanted to marry Cousin Helen just the same, and be her nurse, and take care of her always. But she would not consent. She broke the engagement and told him that some day she hoped that he would love somebody else well enough to marry her. So after a good many years he did, and now he and his wife live next door to Cousin Helen, and are her dearest friends. The little girl is named Helen. All the plans are talked over with her, and there is nobody in the world they think so much of." "But doesn't it make Cousin Helen feel bad when she sees them walking about and enjoying themselves, and she can't move?" asked Katy. "No," said Dr. Carr, "it doesn't, because Cousin Helen is half an angel already, and loves other people better than herself. I'm very glad she could come here for once. She's an example to us all, Katy, and I couldn't ask anything better than to have my little girls take pattern after her." "It must be awful to be sick," soliloquized Katy, after Papa was gone. "Why, if I had to stay in bed a whole week, I should die. I know I should." Poor Katy. It seemed to her, as it does to almost all young people, that there is nothing in the world so easy as to die the moment things go wrong. This conversation with Papa made Cousin Helen doubly interesting in Katy's eyes. It was just like something in a book, to be in the same house with the heroine of a love story so sad and sweet. The play that afternoon was much interrupted, for every few minutes somebody had to run in and see if it wasn't 4 o'clock. The instant the hour came, all 6 children galloped upstairs. "I think we'll tell stories this time," said Cousin Helen. So they told stories. Cousin Helen's were the best of all. There was one of them about a robber, which sent delightful chills creeping down their backs. All but Philly. He was so excited that he grew warlike. "I ain't afraid of robbers," he declared, strutting up and down. "When they come, I shall just cut them in two with the sword which Papa gave me." They did come once. I did cut them in two. 3, 5, 11 of them, you'll see. But that evening, after the younger children were gone to bed, and Katy and Clover were sitting in the blue room, a lamentable howling was heard from the nursery. Clover ran to see what was the matter. Behold, there was Phil, sitting up in bed and crying for help. "There's robbers under the bed," he sobbed. "Ever so many robbers." "Why, no, Philly," said Clover, peeping under the valance to satisfy him. "There isn't anybody there." "Yes, there is, I tell you," declared Phil, holding her tight. "I hear one. They were chewing my India rubbers." "Poor little fellow," said Cousin Helen, when Clover, having pacified Phil, came back to report. "It's a warning against robber stories, but this one ended so well that I didn't think of anybody's being frightened." It was no use, after this, for Aunt Izzie to make rules about going into the blue room. She might as well have ordered flies to keep away from a sugar bowl. By hook or by crook, the children would get upstairs. Whenever Aunt Izzie went in, she was sure to find them there, just as close to Cousin Helen as they could get. And Cousin Helen begged her not to interfere. "We have only 3 or 4 days to be together," she said. "Let them come as much as they like. It won't hurt me a bit." Little Elsie clung with a passionate love to this new friend. Cousin Helen had sharp eyes. She saw the wistful look in Elsie's face at once, and took special pains to be sweet and tender to her. This preference made Katy jealous. She couldn't bear to share her cousin with anybody. When the last evening came, and they went up after tea to the blue room, Cousin Helen was opening a box which had just come by express. "It is a goodbye box," she said. "All of you must sit down in a row, and when I hide my hands behind me, so, you must choose in turn which you will take." So they all chose in turn. "Which hand will you have, the right or the left?" And Cousin Helen, with the air of a wise fairy, brought out from behind her pillow something pretty for each one. First came a vase, exactly like her own, which Katy had admired so much. Katy screamed with delight as it was placed in her hands. "Oh, how lovely, how lovely!" she cried. "I'll keep it as long as I live and breathe." "If you do, it'll be the first time you ever kept anything for a week without breaking it," remarked Aunt Izzy. Next came a pretty purple pocketbook for Clover. It was just what she wanted, for she had lost her portemonnaie. Then a cunning little locket on a bit of velvet ribbon, which Cousin Helen tied round Elsie's neck. "There's a piece of my hair in it," she said. "Why, Elsie, darling, what's the matter? Don't cry so." "Oh, you're so beautiful and so sweet," sobbed Elsie. "And you're going away." Dorry had a box of dominoes, and John a solitaire board. For Phil there appeared a book, The History of the Robber Cat. "That will remind you of the night when the thieves came and chewed your India rubbers," said Cousin Helen, with a mischievous smile. They all laughed, Phil loudest of all. Nobody was forgotten. There was a notebook for Papa, and a set of ivory tablets for Aunt Izzy. Even Sissy was remembered. Her present was the Book of Golden Deeds, with all sorts of stories about boys and girls who had done brave and good things. She was almost too pleased to speak. "Oh, thank you, Cousin Helen," she said at last. Cece wasn't a cousin, but she and the Carr children were in the habit of sharing their aunts and uncles, and relations generally, as they did their other good things. Next day came the sad parting. All the little ones stood at the gate to wave their pocket handkerchiefs as the carriage drove away. When it was quite out of sight, Katy rushed off to weep a little weep, all by herself. "Papa said he wished we were all like Cousin Helen," she thought, as she wiped her eyes. "And I mean to try, though I don't suppose, if I tried 1,000 years, I should ever get to be half so good. I'll study and keep my things in order, and be ever so kind to the little ones. Dear me, if only Aunt Izzy was Cousin Helen, how easy it would be. Never mind, I'll think about her all the time, and I'll begin tomorrow." Chapter 8. Tomorrow. "Tomorrow I will begin," thought Katy, as she dropped asleep that night. How often we all do so, and what a pity it is that when morning comes and tomorrow is today, we so frequently wake up feeling quite differently. Careless or impatient, and not a bit inclined to do the fine things we planned overnight. Sometimes it seems as if there must be wicked little imps in the world, who are kept tied up so long as the sun shines, but to creep into our bedrooms when we are asleep, to tease us and ruffle our tempers. Else, why, when we go to rest good-natured and pleasant, should we wake up so cross? Now there was Katy. Her last sleepy thought was an intention to be an angel from that time on, and as much like Cousin Helen as she could. And when she opened her eyes, she was all out of sorts, and as fractious as a bear. Old Mary said that she got out of bed on the wrong side. I wonder, by the way, if anybody will ever be wise enough to tell us which side that is, so that we may always choose the other. How comfortable it would be if they could. You know how, if we begin the day in a cross mood, all sorts of unfortunate accidents seem to occur, to add to our vexations. The very first thing Katy did this morning was to break her precious vase, the one Cousin Helen had given her. It was standing on the bureau, with a little cluster of blush roses in it. The bureau had a swing glass. While Katy was brushing her hair, the glass tipped a little so that she could not see. At a good-humored moment, this accident wouldn't have troubled her much. But being out of temper to begin with, it made her angry. She gave the glass a violent push. The lower part swung forward. There was a smash, and the first thing Katy knew, the blush roses lay scattered all over the floor, and Cousin Helen's pretty present was ruined. Katy just sat down on the carpet and cried as hard as if she had been Phil himself. Aunt Izzy heard her lamenting and came in. "I'm very sorry," she said, picking up the broken glass, "but it's no more than I expected. You're so careless, Katy. Now don't sit there in that foolish way. Get up and dress yourself. You'll be late to breakfast." "What's the matter?" asked Papa, noticing Katy's red eyes as she took her seat at the table. "I've broken my vase," said Katy dolefully. "It was extremely careless of you to put it in such a dangerous place," said her aunt. "You might have known that the glass would swing and knock it off." Then, seeing a big tear fall in the middle of Katy's plate, she added, "Really, Katy, you're too big to behave like a baby." "Why, Dory would be ashamed to do so. Pray control yourself." This snub did not improve Katy's temper. She went on with the breakfast in sulky silence. "What are you all going to do today?" asked Dr. Carr, hoping to give things a more cheerful turn. "Swing!" cried John and Dory, both together. "Alexander's put us up a splendid one in the woodshed." "No, you're not," said Aunt Izzy in a positive tone. "The swing is not to be used till tomorrow. Remember that, children. Not till tomorrow, and not then, unless I give you leave." This was unwise of Aunt Izzy. She would better have explained farther. The truth was that Alexander, in putting up the swing, had cracked one of the staples which fastened it to the roof. He meant to get a new one in the course of the day, and meantime he had cautioned Miss Carr to let no one use the swing, because it was really not safe. If she had told this to the children, all would have been right. But Aunt Izzy's theory was that young people must obey their elders without explanation. John and Elsie and Dory all pouted when they heard this order. Elsie recovered her good humor first. "I don't care," she said, "'cause I'm going to be very busy. I've got to write a letter to Cousin Helen about something." Elsie never could quite pronounce the TH. "What?" asked Clover. "Oh, something," answered Elsie, wagging her head mysteriously. "None of the rest of you must know. Cousin Helen said so. It's a secret she and me has got." "I don't believe Cousin Helen said so at all," said Katy crossly. "She wouldn't tell secrets to a silly little girl like you." "Yes, she would too," retorted Elsie angrily. "She said I was just as good to trust as if I was ever so big. And she said I was her pet. So there, Katy Carr." "Stop disputing," said Aunt Izzy. "Katy, your top drawer is all out of order. I never saw anything look so badly. Go upstairs at once and straighten it before you do anything else. Children, you must keep in the shade this morning. It's too hot for you to be running about in the sun. Elsie, go into the kitchen and tell Debbie I want to speak to her." "Yes," said Elsie in an important tone, "and afterwards I'm coming back to write my letter to Cousin Helen." Katy went slowly upstairs, dragging one foot after the other. It was a warm, languid day. Her head ached a little, and her eyes smarted and felt heavy from crying so much. Everything seemed dull and hateful. She said to herself that Aunt Izzy was very unkind to make her work in vacation, and she pulled the top drawer open with a disgusted groan. It must be confessed that Miss Izzy was right. A bureau drawer could hardly look worse than this one did. It reminded one of the White Knight's recipe for a pudding, which began with blotting paper and ended with sealing wax and gunpowder. All sorts of things were mixed together, as if somebody had put in a long stick and stirred them well up. There were books and paint boxes and bits of scribbled paper and lead pencils and brushes. Stocking legs had come unrolled and twisted themselves about pocket handkerchiefs, and ends of ribbon and linen collars. Ruffles all crushed out of shape stuck up from under the heavy things, and sundry little paper boxes lay empty on top, the treasures they once held having sifted down to the bottom of the drawer and disappeared beneath the general mass. It took much time and patience to bring order out of this confusion, but Katy knew that Aunt Izzy would be up by and by, and she dared not stop till all was done. By the time it was finished, she was very tired. Going downstairs, she met Elsie coming up with a slate in her hand, which, as soon as she saw Katy, she put behind her. "You mustn't look," she said. "It's my letter to Cousin Helen. Nobody but me knows the secret. It's all written, and I'm going to send it to the office. See, there's a stamp on it." And she exhibited a corner of the slate. Sure enough, there was a stamp stuck on the frame. "You little goose," said Katy impatiently. "You can't send that to the post office. Here, give me the slate. I'll copy what you have written on paper, and Papa will give you an envelope." "No, no," cried Elsie, struggling. "You mustn't. You'll see what I've said, and Cousin Helen said I wasn't to tell. It's a secret. Let go of my slate, I say. I'll tell Cousin Helen what a mean girl you are, and then she won't love you a bit." "There, then, take your old slate," said Katy, giving her a vindictive push. Elsie slipped, screamed, caught at the banisters, missed them, and rolling over and over, fell with a thump on the hall floor. It wasn't much of a fall, only half a dozen steps, but the bump was a hard one, and Elsie roared as if she had been half killed. Aunt Izzy and Mary came rushing to the spot. "Katy pushed me," sobbed Elsie. "She wanted me to tell her my secret, and I wouldn't. She's a bad, naughty girl." "Well, Katy Carr, I should think you'd be ashamed of yourself," said Aunt Izzy. "Wreaking your temper on your poor little sister. I think your Cousin Helen will be surprised when she hears this. There, Elsie. Don't cry any more, dear. Come upstairs with me. I'll put on some arnica, and Katy shan't hurt you again." So they went upstairs. Katy, left below, felt very miserable. Repentant, defiant, discontented, and sulky all at once. She knew in her heart that she had not meant to hurt Elsie, but was thoroughly ashamed of that push. But Aunt Izzy's hint about telling Cousin Helen had made her too angry to allow of her confessing this to herself or anybody else. "I don't care," she murmured, choking back her tears. "Elsie is a real crybaby, anyway, and Aunt Izzy always takes her part, just because I told the little silly not to go and send a great heavy slate to the post office." She went out by the side door into the yard. As she passed the shed, the new swing caught her eye. How exactly like Aunt Izzy, she thought, ordering the children not to swing till she gives them leave. I suppose she thinks it's too hot or something. I shan't mind her anyhow. She seated herself in the swing. It was a first-rate one, with a broad, comfortable seat and thick new ropes. The seat, hung just the right distance from the floor. Alexander was a capital hand at putting up swings, and the woodshed the nicest possible spot in which to have one. It was a big place with a very high roof. There was not much wood left in it just now, and the little there was piled neatly about the sides of the shed, so as to leave plenty of room. The place felt cool and dark, and the motion of the swing seemed to set the breeze blowing. It waved Katy's hair like a great fan, and made her dreamy and quiet. All sorts of sleepy ideas began to flit through her brain. Swinging to and fro like a pendulum of a great clock, she gradually rose higher and higher, driving herself along by the motion of her body, and striking the floor smartly with her foot at every sweep. Now she was at the top of the high arched door. Then she could almost touch the cross beam above it, and through the small square window could see pigeons sitting and pluming themselves on the eaves of the barn, and white clouds blowing over the blue sky. She had never swung so high before. It was like flying, she thought, and she bent and curved more strongly in the seat, trying to send herself yet higher, and graze the roof with her toes. Suddenly, at the very highest point of the sweep, there was a sharp noise of cracking. The swing gave a violent twist, and spun half around, and tossed Katy into the air. She clutched the rope, felt it dragged from her grasp. Then, down, down, down she fell. All grew dark, and she knew no more. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the sofa in the dining room. Clover was kneeling beside her with a pale, scared face, and Aunt Izzy was dropping something cold and wet on her forehead. "What's the matter?" said Katy faintly. "Oh, she's alive! She's alive!" And Clover put her arms round Katy's neck and sobbed. "Hush, dear." Aunt Izzy's voice sounded unusually gentle. "You've had a bad tumble, Katy. Don't you recollect?" "A tumble? Oh, yes, out of the swing," said Katy, as it all came slowly back to her. "Did the rope break, Aunt Izzy? I can't remember about it." "No, Katy, not the rope. The staple drew out of the roof. It was a cracked one and not safe. Don't you recollect my telling you not to swing today? Did you forget?" "No, Aunt Izzy, I didn't forget. But here Katy broke down. She closed her eyes, and big tears rolled from under the lids. "Don't cry," whispered Clover, crying herself. "Please don't. Aunt Izzy isn't going to scold you." But Katy was too weak and shaken not to cry. "I think I'd like to go upstairs and lie on the bed," she said. But when she tried to get off the sofa, everything swam before her, and she fell back again on the pillow. "Why, I can't stand up," she gasped, looking very much frightened. "I'm afraid you've given yourself a sprain somewhere," said Aunt Izzy, who looked rather frightened herself. "You'd better lie still a while, dear, before you try to move. Ah, there's the doctor. Well, I am glad." And she went forward to meet him. It wasn't Papa, but Dr. Alsop, who lived quite near them. "I'm so relieved that you could come," Aunt Izzy said. "My brother is gone out of town, not to return till tomorrow. And one of the little girls has had a bad fall." Dr. Alsop sat down beside the sofa and counted Katy's pulse. Then he began feeling all over her. "Can you move this leg?" he asked. Katy gave a feeble kick. "And this?" The kick was a good deal more feeble. "Did that hurt you?" asked Dr. Alsop, seeing a look of pain on her face. "Yes, a little," cried Katy, trying hard not to cry. "In your back, eh? Was the pain high up or low down?" And the doctor punched Katy's spine for some minutes, making her squirm uneasily. "I'm afraid she's done some mischief," he said at last, "but it's impossible to tell yet exactly what. It may be only a twist or a slight sprain," he added, seeing the look of terror on Katy's face. "You'd better get her upstairs and undress her as soon as you can, Miss Carr. I'll leave a prescription to rub her with." And Dr. Alsop took out a bit of paper and began to write. "Oh, must I go to bed?" said Katy. "How long will I have to stay there, doctor?" "That depends on how fast you get well," replied the doctor. "Not long, I hope. Perhaps only a few days." "A few days," repeated Katy in a despairing tone. After the doctor was gone, Aunt Izzy and Debbie lifted Katy and carried her slowly upstairs. It was not easy, for every motion hurt her, and the sense of being helpless hurt most of all. She couldn't help crying after she was undressed and put into bed. It all seemed so dreadful and strange. If only Papa was here, she thought. But Dr. Carr had gone into the country to see somebody who was very sick, and couldn't possibly be back till tomorrow. Such a long, long afternoon as that was. Aunt Izzy set up some dinner, but Katy couldn't eat. Her lips were parched, and her head ached violently. The sun began to pour in, the room grew warm, flies buzzed in the window, and tormented her by lighting on her face. Little prickles of pain ran up and down her back. She lay with her eyes shut because it hurt to keep them open, and all sorts of uneasy thoughts went rushing through her mind. "Perhaps if my back is really sprained, I shall have to lie here as much as a week," she said to herself. "Oh, dear, dear, I can't. The vacation is only 8 weeks, and I was going to do such lovely things. How can people be as patient as Cousin Helen when they have to lie still? Won't she be sorry when she hears? Was it really yesterday that she went away? It seems a year. If only I hadn't got into that nasty old swing." And then Katy began to imagine how it would have been if she hadn't, and how she and Clover had meant to go to Paradise that afternoon. They might have been there under the cool trees now. As these thoughts went through her mind, her head grew hotter, and her position in the bed more uncomfortable. Suddenly she became conscious that the glaring light from the window was shaded, and that the wind seemed to be blowing freshly over her. She opened her heavy eyes. The blinds were shut, and there, beside the bed, sat little Elsie, fanning her with a palm-leaf fan. "Did I wake you up, Katy?" she asked in a timid voice. Katy looked at her with startled, amazed eyes. "Don't be frightened," said Elsie. "I won't disturb you. Johnny and me are so sorry you're sick." And her little lips trembled. "But we meant to keep real quiet and never bang the nursery door or make noises on the stairs till you're well again. And I brought you something real nice. Some of it's from John and some from me. It's because you got tumbled out of the swing, see?" And Elsie pointed triumphantly to a chair, which she had pulled up close to the bed, and on which were solemnly set forth, first, a pewter tea set, second, a box with a glass lid on which flowers were painted, third, a jointed doll, fourth, a transparent slate, and lastly 2 new lead pencils. "They're all yours to keep," said generous little Elsie. "You can have Pickery, too, if you want, only he's pretty big, and I'm afraid he'd be lonely without me. Don't you like the things, Katy? They're real pretty." It seemed to Katy as if the hottest sort of coal or fire was burning into the top of her head as she looked at the treasures on the chair, and then at Elsie's face, all lighted up with affectionate self-sacrifice. She tried to speak, but began to cry instead, which frightened Elsie very much. "Does it hurt you so bad?" she asked, crying too, from sympathy. "Oh, no, it isn't that," sobbed Katy. "But I was so cross to you this morning, Elsie, and pushed you. Oh, please forgive me, please do." "Why, it's got well," said Elsie, surprised. "Aunt Izzy put a thing out of a bottle on it, and the bump all went away. Shall I go and ask her to put some on you too? I will." And she ran toward the door. "Oh, no," cried Katy. "Don't go away, Elsie. Come here and kiss me instead." Elsie turned as if doubtful whether this invitation could be meant for her. Katy held out her arms. Elsie ran right into them, and the big sister and the little exchanged an embrace which seemed to bring their hearts closer together than they had ever been before. "You're the most precious little darling," murmured Katy, clasping Elsie tight. "I've been real horrid to you, Elsie, but I'll never be again. You shall play with me and Clover and Cecy just as much as you like, and write notes in all the post offices, and everything else." "Oh, goody, goody!" cried Elsie, executing little skips of transport. "How sweet you are, Katy. I mean to love you next best to Cousin Helen and Papa." And, racking her brains for some way of repaying this wonderful kindness, "I'll tell you the secret if you want me to very much. I guess Cousin Helen would let me." "No," said Katy, "never mind about the secret. I don't want you to tell it to me. Sit down by the bed and fan me some more instead." "No," persisted Elsie, who, now that she had made up her mind to part with the treasured secret, could not bear to be stopped. "Cousin Helen gave me $50 and told me to give it to Debbie, and tell her she was much obliged to her for making her such nice things to eat. And I did, and Debbie was real pleased, and I wrote Cousin Helen a letter and told her that Debbie liked the $50. That's the secret. Isn't it a nice one? Only you mustn't tell anybody about it, ever, just as long as you live." "No," said Katy, smiling faintly. "I won't." All the rest of the afternoon, Elsie sat beside the bed with her palm-leaf fan, keeping off the flies, and shooing away the other children when they peeped in at the door. "Do you really like to have me here?" she asked more than once, and smiled, oh, so triumphantly, when Katy said yes. But though Katy said yes, I am afraid it was only half the truth, for the sight of the dear little forgiving girl, whom she had treated unkindly, gave her more pain than pleasure. "I'll be so good to her when I get well," she thought to herself, tossing uneasily to and fro. Aunt Izzy slept in her room that night. Katy was feverish. When morning came and Dr. Carr returned, he found her in a good deal of pain, hot and restless, with wide-open, anxious eyes. "Papa," she cried the first thing, "must I lie here as much as a week?" "My darling, I'm afraid you must," replied her father, who looked worried and very grave. "Dear, dear," sobbed Katy, "how can I bear it?"